Good morning and welcome to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. I'm Haleh Esfandiari, the director of the Middle East program at the center. We are thrilled to be partnering with Women's Learning Partnership to host this extraordinary meeting on women and democratic transition in the Middle East with so many women leaders from the region. Just let me tell you a few words about the Wilson Center. The center is the living national memorial to President Wilson, established by Congress in 1968. It is a non-partisan institution that provides a link between the world of idea and the world of policy. The Middle East program at the Wilson Center was launched in February of 1998. The program concentrates on long-term economic, social, political developments, as well as women's rights and human rights in the region. The Middle East program hosts between 50 to 60 meetings per year, bringing experts and practitioners from the United States and around the world. Since its inception, we have hosted 108 gender meetings in Washington and 10 workshops in the MENA region. We have had 14 publications on women's rights in the MENA region. In addition to today's meeting, we are also having, just to give you a flavor of what we do, on Friday, 2 meetings on women's issues. One with Haifa Abu Ghazala, the Minister of Tourism in Jordan and the former head of UNIFEM in the MENA region, and a book launch on human trafficking in Dubai, written by a former Wilson Center fellow, Pardis Mahdavi. Since the beginning of the Arab Spring, we have invited a number of women activists, academics, and politicians from the region to come and share their views with us, either in person or via Skype. Among our participants, we had the current Minister for Women's Affairs in Tunisia, Lilia Labidi. The Wilson Center is very fortunate to have a woman president and CEO, Jane Harman. After 17 years as a congresswoman in the United States House of Representatives, she left to take over the leadership of the Wilson Center. Jane is very much interested in gender issues. She is sorry not to be here today as she is in New York. Just last night, the Wilson Center launched in New York the Wilson Center Initiative regarding the Council of Women World Leaders, a network of 45 current and former women presidents, prime ministers, and ministers, which was established in 1966 and was housed at the Aspen Institute, and now we are going to be the new house for this organization. And tonight, just on the eve of becoming the first female head of state to open the United Nations General Assembly in its 66 years history, Brazil's President Dilma Rousseff will receive the Wilson Center's award for public service in New York. Now, back to more real things. We are having 2 panels today. The first one is moderated by Jackie Leiden of National Public Radio, an old friend of the center and me. And the second panel after the break by Jacqueline Pitangu from Brazil. You see, there is a softness for Brazil at the Wilson Center. We have a Brazil Institute, actually, at the center. Um, I will now call on Mahnaz Afkhami, the President and CEO of Women's Learning Partnership, to come to the podium. Mahnaz has been a leading advocate of women's rights for more than 4 decades. Our friendship and collaboration goes back to pre-revolutionary Iran, when Mahnaz was first the Secretary General of the Women's Organization of Iran, and among her great achievements was the passage of the Family Protection Law of 1967 and its revision of 1975. I believe that it was this law that inspired a lot of women activists in the region to push for similar laws in their countries. Mahnaz serves on the boards and steering committees of several international organizations, including the Women's Rights Division of Human Rights Watch and the International Museum of Women, where she chairs the Global Advisory Council. Prior to the Islamic Revolution in Iran, she taught English literature at the National University of Iran, and she also was Iran's Minister for Women's Affairs, I believe the first Minister for Women's Affairs in the region. She served from 1975 to 1978. Mahnaz, you have the floor. Thank you and welcome again to the center.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to see all of these faces. Some very familiar at this meeting. And it's a pleasure to be here at the Wilson Center, both because of the space that it provides for interesting debate and dialogue from across the world, and especially under the direction of Hale at issues regarding the Middle East. It has really been an extraordinary effort that she has led, and an unbelievable access to all the important figures, both cultural, artistic, political, that have dealt with issues in the Middle East, and she has really done an extraordinary job. Of course, as she said, we have worked together for many, many, many years, more than either of us wishes to recall, but some of it really bad times and some really good ones. But today is a culmination for us and for the speakers of 3 intense days of brainstorming and deliberation. The partnership that is represented here on the 2 panels is one that was actually an outgrowth of the Beijing deliberations, the Beijing conference. And in 1999, 4 years of talking and discussing and brainstorming as to what is it that women need across the world, what is the value added, what is missing. And we came at that point to the conclusion that what is missing is, of course, presence of women at all levels of policy making, but even more than that. That is, we thought at that time that 30% is sort of the percentage that then will allow women to be really women and yet participate in policy making, and not just simply men who are in skirts or makeup. But we thought that not only 30% is not by itself enough, but even 50-50 is not enough. So we thought of a 50-50 plus scenario. And the plus actually means this, that the world, let's just be honest, is in a mess. Things are not working. Even though we as the human race have more working for us now than ever before. We have scientific advances, we have more money, the economies are producing much more, connections are better, but we're not doing what we need to do. Everything that needs to be done seems to be stalled. And so what we need to do as women is not just to push to be 50-50 in a sort of a messy situation, but to sort of think again about a vision for the whole world and not just half of it. And how do we want to change the face of how people react to each other, interact with each other, from the family to the community to society to the international level. So we started with a series of learning tools that we created together as a partnership, because we began as a partnership. We didn't begin with an idea and then go and elect partners. So we created a series of learning tools and a strategy for using those learning tools, the essence of which is true respect for the other, true respect for diversity, for the fact that every human being, man, woman, across the various differences, has a right to participate in their decisions that affect their lives and can be a leader, can be simultaneously a leader and a follower, and both at the same times very often. And so this is the kind of relationship that we want to build in families, in schools, in employment situations, people deciding, contributing, working together. It might sound idealistic, it might sound difficult, but it's, to us, the basis of democratic interaction in the broadest sense. And so we have been working for, the organization actually was formally established in 2000. We've been working for those years in actually expanding this. We now work in 20 countries, in 20 language adaptations. So even though we believe in universal rights of individuals, we also believe in relative contextual implementation of those rights. So it's not, exportable. The essential is idea is exportable, but not the way it is done and the priorities. So that's the essence. So when all of a sudden, and we've been meeting every year, and very difficult actually getting people from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe in places together, just simply the issues of visas. We weren't even able to get the chair of our board, Soraya Obaid, who's the Undersecretary General of the United Nations, just retired. She didn't get her visa soon enough to be with us. So she was on Skype, and this is also an example of the kind of energy and perseverance. She was on Skype until 2:00 a.m. Jeddah time the last 3 days. So, and she's probably actually listening in Jeddah right now to what we are saying. So there are these difficulties, but we have been getting together so that we are on the same wavelength, that we understand what needs to be done. This latest gathering that we had the last 3 days was the first one after the Arab Spring. Even though we had been preparing for democratic transitions, nevertheless, like everyone else, we were all caught off guard. We were all surprised, and we all were presented with a situation where we didn't quite know what is to be done. So these 3 days were essentially to discuss issues, challenges, and strategies. And the two panels that are going to be addressing you and hopefully engaging in interactive dialogue in some ways will reflect the discussions that we have had, and discussions that are also the outcome of many gatherings in the region and at the national level in the last few months. Some of it is very hopeful, some of it not as hopeful, but I hope that we will share and discuss together. Now, the first panel is being chaired by my good friend Jackie Leiden. I've had the pleasure of working with her for many years now. I remember our fearful, trembling experience of Jackie entering Iran, one of the very first journalists who went to the revolutionary Iran. And she did, as she always does, as a correspondent and as an anchor and a host. She always goes and gets the most interesting little images and experiences that represent what's going on. She went mountain climbing with the young people who find refuge from the problems and restrictions. So she did that kind of thing. She went to classrooms at universities with our other friend, Azar Nafisi, to see how they're being taught. So she always brings that kind of love of the region and love of the people of the region. And of course, she has been to every part of the Middle East, and some of it in post-conflict, some of it in conflict times, and she has done a marvelous job. And so today we're very happy to have her moderating this panel. And the people on the panel are going to be introduced by Jackie, but they're all from across disciplines. Academics, activists, and at the same time people who've been in government as well as non-governmental. So there's a lot of interesting things that they're going to be sharing with us. So thank you very much, and Jackie, please go ahead.
Thank you, Manaz. Thank you, Hale. Thank you. And good morning, everyone. And I just want to say, with two visionary women like Hale and Mahnaz and all the people on this stage, I'm personally, not only as a journalist, I'm just personally very excited to be here and honored to be amongst you. We have with us, we are from Egypt to Morocco to Lebanon with Lena this morning. Let me just please introduce some of these women I've known. Asma and I go back to, I think, the early 1990s. Asma Khater from Jordan is just a foremost human rights advisor, scholar, lawyer, jurist. She is also, more recently, one of just 3 official UN Human Rights Council investigators about the human rights abuses we've been hearing and reading about in Libya. She's also Secretary General of the Jordanian National Commission for Women, and she has also been on the advisory committee of the Women's Division for Human Rights Watch. So, to my left, Asma Khater.
Thank you.
And I think I'll introduce everybody, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
All right?
Good, yeah.
And to her left here, we have with us from Egypt, Farida Nakash. Hello, Farida.
Hello.
And she is also a human rights activist, feminist, journalist. She is the editor-in-chief for Al-Ahali, which is a political newsletter in Egypt, and previously had been editor-in-chief of Adab wa Nakht, a monthly magazine on literary criticism, also the first female Egyptian editor-in-chief of a political newspaper. So, ahlan wa sahlan.
Ahlan wa sahlan.
And to my right here, we have from Morocco, and Rabia will be speaking in French, and Lena will be translating for her. Rabia Nassiri is co-founder of the Association Démocratique des Femmes de Maroc, one of the largest Moroccan NGOs focused on women's rights, and she was on the executive committee of the Euro-Mediterranean Human Rights Network, which is a consortium of some 70 human rights organizations in the MENA region. She is a renowned scholar on women with expertise in issues of poverty, Islam, strategizing and building capacity, and kindly consenting to be wearing the chapeau today is Lena Abu Habib from Lebanon, because she is not only going to be translating, but she herself is executive director of CRTVA, which is the collection for research on women's rights, an NGO in Lebanon, and she is here from Beirut. So thank you so much. And I think let's begin with you, Asma, if you don't mind. I would like you to please tell us a little bit generally about, we have a very knowledgeable audience. I know you're not starting by any means. I see a lot of old friends, journalists, scholars from Ground Zero, but give us a little bit of a picture of women's issues in your region, in Jordan, Levant, and then I'd like to ask you some questions about what you've been seeing in Libya.
Thank you. Good morning. It's really a pleasure and honor to be with you today and to try to answer some questions in mind, as the region and women in the region are under close eye of the whole world now. And I think the Jordanian women generally are half of the population, a little bit less than half in numbers. but also they did great in terms of health and education. Jordan was able to be the #1, sometimes after Bahrain or before Bahrain, according to the years, last 5 years. But the education is, female education is one of the highest achievements for Jordanian women. Also healthcare is another area. But if we may focus on the gaps we have, we may talk about political representation and women in the economy. It's not normal that you have this high level of education, university graduates, female university graduates, but not reflecting this in the labor market and the economy. The percentage of women in the labor market are only 14.6%. This is the main challenge for Jordan. There are, of course, informal sector, economic sector, where women are active in the agriculture, in some businesses at home, which is not registered and not recognized officially. There are the other aspect, which is political representation. The political representation is now growing, but very slowly. We do have some ministries, as Ms. Haifa Abu Ghazali, who is going to be here, I think, next week. And also, we have women in the parliament, but the percentage is around 10.5, which is not high. We do have achieved a lot in terms of the local government. Women in the local government in Jordan are now 27.5%. According to the new law, they are going to be around 30%. We have 25% quota, and women were able to do about 5% above the quota seats. There are some areas needs a lot of work related to family and personal rights. We did in 2010 amend our personal status law. There was a very good amendments, and we were inspired by the Moroccan experience. In that, not us only as women movement, but also I think the Sharia code judges and others who were involved. But it is still not up to the standards that we are thinking we deserve as women and as children in the family. Also in the nationality law, there is another challenge. Women in Jordan cannot pass their nationality to their children. It's now, after the Arab Spring, I can say that women who suffered from this discrimination are more inspired by the revolution, and they are demonstrating for their rights in more active way after the revolution in Egypt, in Tunisia, in other countries. And I think more and more women are now realizing their rights as part of the results of the long period of work, but also as a result of the individual citizens discover their own power in Jordan, in other countries, and they realized, women specifically, that as citizens who have votes and they have the right to be the resource of the power and the authority in the country, they are more than any time before willing to be part of the movement and willing to be part of the change that is needed now in the societies.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Farida, inspiration. After Tunisia, I think Egyptian people inspired so many of us and so many others in the region. Hopes were really raised. Maybe you could talk about Where for Women. You are both a political writer and someone who draws on literature. Where things are right now. Give us a frontline report.
Sabah al-Khair. This is good morning in Arabic. 7 months ago, I will not come here and face those respectable people, because we were very desperate. We're disappointed because of the corruption and despotism of the regime. Now the picture changed completely. In Egypt, people are full of hope. Women participated on a large scale in the revolution. Every action in the revolution included women. even when the young people discover that there are security agents who are within the square, within Tahrir Square, they arrested them and they built up a local prison, very small local prison. This prison was led by a girl, and they called her General Amira because she was very powerful, strong, and courageous, and very, very active. So women participated everywhere and in all times during the revolution. They slept in the square. They distributed leaflets. They asked people who are in the demonstrations, people who stayed at home, to come down to the streets. They were very, very active. But on the other hand, the results of the revolution is not what women expected. For example, before the revolution, we were having three ministers, 3 women ministers. Now, after the military came, there are only one minister. When the military, of course, is part of the revolution, because they supported the people and refused to shoot, refused to go in conflict with the people, and of course toppled down Mubarak. When the amendments of the constitution started, there were 11 people who made these amendments. There was no woman, although lawyers in Egypt, women lawyers in Egypt, are working in this field since the beginning of even before the beginning of the century. So we feel that there is a similarity between what happened in the 25th of January revolution and the 19th national revolution against the British occupation. Women also participated on a large scale in the national revolution against, and they were shot. I forgot to say that there are martyrs among women in the square, in all the squares, because it was not only Tahrir, it was the squares all over the country. In 1919, national revolution against occupation, women also participated on a very large scale, but when the constitution was written, there is no rights for women.
So a bit of a fear of history repeating itself.
Yes. Although they participated and shot down, there were 4 martyrs of women at the beginning of the century. So, but we don't feel that this is the last say. Right. There is still we still go on fighting for our rights. We fight for a new law for family, a new family law to be based on the international reference resolutions, and there is a powerful feminist movement. There is also a powerful democratic movement that human rights, women's rights are included in the human rights according to their view. And so we are hopeful and not desperate now.
Right, shukran. Thank you. So, Rabia, when it comes to Morocco, the Maghreb is obviously seeing the changes that we are talking about from Egypt to Libya. I'd like to know in Morocco what impact this is having with, on women. And perhaps you could include young people as well, because you have observed all these things.
Merci, bonjour. Ce que je voulais dire pour vous mettre dans le contexte, que schématiquement, pour faire vite, nous avons eu le printemps mais sans la révolution. Donc,
just to contextualize my intervention, we have actually had the spring without the revolution in Morocco.
C'est-à-dire qu'il y a eu une onde de choc. L'onde de choc des révolutions, surtout la révolution tunisienne et égyptienne, a eu des impacts importants sur le Maroc. Les gens sont sortis aussi dans les rues.
So the Tunisian and the Egyptian revolution have actually, the effect have been felt in Morocco, and people have taken the streets as a result.
Au Maroc, on avait commencé les réformes, je crois que les réformes bien avant les révolutions. Plusieurs réformes en matière de droits des femmes, en matière politique, institutionnelle. Mais durant les dernières années, il y a eu un essoufflement, disons, du rythme des réformes.
Okay. Reforms in Morocco had begun well before the Arab Springs. Reforms in terms of women's rights, the Mudawwana, the family law, political reforms. However, during the past period, the pace has slowed down a little bit in Morocco.
Et donc, ce qu'on appelle le printemps arabe a permis d'accélérer et de pousser vers, disons, de nouvelles réformes et d'accélérer le rythme des réformes.
So actually the impact of what we call Arab Spring has been to give new vigor and accelerate these reforms in Morocco.
Et donc les choses se sont passées différemment parce que la monarchie, le roi, a très vite compris, disons, quels sont les enjeux. Donc très très vite, dès le mois de début mars.
So the process has been different because the monarchy has understood what is at stake, given what is going on in the Arab region.
Et donc, dès le début du mois de mars, il y a eu l'annonce de l'ouverture de la réforme constitutionnelle, qui est un enjeu, c'est le pacte politique et social par excellence.
And in March, which is a landmark in what is happening in Morocco, the king announced the startup of the process of the constitutional reform, which is the basis of the political and social pact in Morocco.
Donc, la réforme constitutionnelle a apporté des acquis importants pour les femmes, d'une façon générale, et pour les libertés individuelles.
The process of recent process of constitutional reforms in Morocco has brought in significant gains for women, but also in terms of overall freedoms.
Et la question de l'égalité en droit civil, l'égalité entre les hommes et les femmes en droit civil, a été, disons, le débat central, et aussi la relation entre la religion et l'islam, la législation et l'islam. Est-ce que l'inspiration, est-ce que la législation marocaine va être basée sur les droits de l'homme, sur les conventions internationales ou sur l'islam, ont été des questions centrales dans le débat.
So at the heart of the debate on constitutional reform were actually two issues. Equal civil rights for women and men citizens, and the relation between religion and legislations. Will the legislation in Morocco be based on the international human rights instruments or on religion? These were at the heart of the debate in Morocco.
Et je crois que la Constitution a été votée par référendum populaire le 1er juillet, et par certains aspects, elle est très très avancée. Par certains aspects. Je ne dis pas tous les aspects, mais certains aspects, elle est très avancée.
So the Constitution was voted by a referendum, and the new reformed constitutions in certain aspects is actually quite advanced, but she's insisting that certain aspects are actually advanced, but not the overall reformed constitution.
Peut-être que je reviendrai, si j'ai un peu de temps, sur un petit peu quels sont les principaux enjeux, disons, de cette réforme, ou les principaux acquis de cette réforme.
If she has time in the debate later, she might come back on the main gains, but also the main gaps of the constitutional reform.
We will give you the time. All right, thank you. Asma, maybe you could tell us, when so much has been energized, as we've been hearing from everybody about Arab Spring, after Arab Spring, in terms of raising expectations, but you just came from a place where there's even more chaos and, of course, the destruction. What were you, I would be interested in knowing if you were able to speak to women specifically. They're in a different spot, and I think everyone would want to know what you've seen and what people were telling you.
In Libya, you mean? Yes. Well, I think, yes, the problem is that Libya is a tribal society, mainly, and very conservative in many areas, especially in the rural areas. And it was not easy to talk to women, especially when it comes to specific kind of violations. Of course, we documented cases such as Iman Al-Abedi, who was brave enough to speak to the media about the rape that she was a victim of. But also there are other cases that I was able to meet and document, but very few, comparing with the hundreds of reports that we received that there was rape and sexual abuse as part of the war against people and against the National Council. Of course, women are suffering from all other human rights violations. They were targeted as civilians. They were suffering from lack of water, electricity, food, movement, all of these issues. And of course, we also documented cases where women were used by the Gaddafi troops in the previous time in committing some human rights violations also. And in fact, the situation there will not allow well documented cases that can be used in front of the International Criminal Court, for example, but I think the time will come, especially that we are seeing that the National Council is nearly controlling most of Libya, that we will be able to do that. And because of this, our mandate was expanded a little bit to allow us to further investigate these situations. One very important aspect is that there are women in the National Council. At least I met one of them. And I think they are aware as a new leading power, that there is a need to be committed to human rights principles and to the equality between man and woman, and we discuss these issues with them, despite of the fact that it is not going to be easy. There are powers in the society who are not really believe in these values, and they are not really willing to see that this change is going to happen. But the latest speeches by the chair of the council confirmed that they are going to be a modern Islamic democratic state. And they will be committed to human rights principles. Anyway, I think Libya is a society where we need also to support, especially women there, to be able to build their own organizations and power. There are, in fact, I met with few organizations who was established only after the revolution in Benghazi and in some areas, but they need a lot of support, a lot of work to help them, take their space in the new era. And I do believe that there are very serious violations to their rights within the incidents, the late incidents, but also even historically they were subjected to a lot of isolation and discrimination that need, in spite of the lip service that was presented before, but now you can see on the ground that they were suffering a lot.
Well, thank you. I know that fundamentalism is one of the things that you've been working on together in the 3 days that Mehnaz has led you through things, but with Women's Learning Partnership. And that this organization in the past 11 years has been challenging full citizenship, for example. You mentioned that is still a problem with inheritance in Jordan. And of course, as you just said, Farida, previously 3 cabinet ministers, now 1, and I think when it comes to provincial governorships in Egypt, almost no women, if I'm not mistaken. Tell us about what you're preparing for with fundamentalist challenges as the elections loom.
Actually, the fundamentalism is one of the main challenges in the in the Muslim world, not only in the Arab world. Because I think that the religious reform was never complete. Since Ibn Rushd, a very famous Muslim philosopher who lived in Andalusia.
Could you repeat that name?
Ibn Rushd. Yes. Since 8 centuries ago, started the religious reform thoughts, not movements. And this is one of the challenges, how to transform the religious progressive thoughts and the new interpretation of Quran into a mass movement, not to be within the intellectuals only. This is one of the main things. The Arab and Muslim intellectuals failed up till now because of many reasons, the despotism and tribalism and poverty. When the masses are very poor, they are very easily led by religious people. So I think after the revolution in Egypt, although the challenge of the Salafists and Muslim brothers is very strong, the movement for religious reform is starting to grow. There will be no easy solution. But what we can do, as I think, is to how to empower the democratic and secular parties and syndicates, civil society associations, particularly women associations, to go together, to cooperate and collaborate, to be able to confront the fundamentalists, because they are also very rich because the fundamentalist groups are very rich because they are related to the Gulf, to the oil reactionary monarchies in the Gulf, mainly in Saudi Arabia.
When you speak together, how do you talk about building capacity specifically as you try to come together across borders? And maybe Rabia could talk about that as well and join us. Can you translate that for her, Lena? What?
Quand on travaille ensemble sur la question du fondamentalisme, quelles sont nos stratégies, comment on travaille entre un pays et un autre?
En fait, je voulais dire que le problème, on a tendance à focaliser sur un seul aspect quand on parle de fondamentalisme.
The mistake when we talk about fundamentalism is that we have a tendency to focus on one particular aspect only.
Et nous oublions que, en fait, le problème vient aussi de la complicité des pouvoirs politiques et des régimes en place avec et l'instrumentalisation de ces mouvements. Et le danger vient de là.
And we tend to forget that the real danger comes from the complacency between the regimes and between these forces and the tradition of instrumentalizing these fundamentalist and religious forces.
Et bien sûr, pour répondre à votre question, Jackie, bien sûr, nous avons discuté pendant 2 jours de ces questions-là et comment nous allons travailler dans l'avenir.
Of course, in response to Jackie's questions, we have been debating, discussing these issues over the past few days, particularly on what we will be doing practically in terms of strategies.
Je crois que parmi les idées, c'est que nous, je ne sais pas si toutes mes amies là sont d'accord, mais que le temps est venu pour revoir nos stratégies et notre façon de travailler.
One of the ideas that arise is that it is high time for us, and well, this is subject also to the what do all our colleagues think about this. It is high time to review critically the strategies we've been using so far.
Par exemple, tout le travail qui doit être fait sur les réformes constitutionnelles, qui est une composante centrale maintenant, disons, des réformes à venir, de la transition politique et démocratique.
For instance, the key issue in this political and democratic transition in the region is the fundamental issue of constitutional reforms.
Il y a aussi tout le travail que nous sommes obligés de faire. Et malheureusement, dans l'ensemble des pays arabes, il y a très peu, la contribution des intellectuels est très très faible au débat, à la clarification des débats. Je donne un exemple.
Okay, so focusing on constitutional reforms is one strategy. The other gap, she's starting by describing a gap, is that also historically the contributions of intellectuals in the analysis in the Arab region has always been limited, and she's going to give an example.
Par exemple, depuis le début des révolutions tunisiennes et égyptiennes, on parle de l'État civil, Dawla al-Madaniya.
For instance, since the start of the Tunisian revolution, we have started hearing about the civil state.
Et donc les frères musulmans, les mouvements des frères musulmans d'une façon générale, au Maroc, en Tunisie, en Égypte, parlent comme si c'était une avancée incroyable.
And the Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, in Morocco, talk about the civil Egypt actually mention the civil state as a great step forward.
Mais en fait, on ne sait pas ce que ça veut dire, ce concept de civil state.
However, this concept of civil state is still nebulous. We don't know what it
Il y a
means.
aussi la question des minorités. Il n'y a pas de débat clair. Quelle est la place? Quelle place nous allons, est-ce que nous allons reconnaître la diversité ethnique, religieuse, etc., etc.
There's also no serious debate, no in-depth debate about what shall we do about minorities. What would be the position, the place, the rights, the fundamental rights of minorities, ethnic, cultural, religious minorities. But this is within the framework of what is our position vis-à-vis diversity.
Yeah. Et puis, bien sûr, il y a la situation du statut des femmes qui a fait, malgré les révolutions, il y a eu très peu de débats dans nos pays. Bon, un peu au Maroc, parce que très peu de débats, et un peu au Maroc et en Tunisie, mais dans les autres pays, très peu de débats sur le statut des femmes.
And the position, the status of women has been subject to very, except in Morocco and in Tunisia, there has been very little debate. Despite the changes, despite the revolutions, there has been hardly any debate about the position of women in this region.
I think that also one of the things that you're looking at is the poverty of a lot of women, and in general, we had been discussing earlier, Jordan is facing huge economic problems. Egypt, certainly the tourism industry has come to almost a dead halt. Talk about what effect that has had on trying to reach out to, Rabia just mentioned, translating this constitution down so that it isn't only the province of intellectuals, that everybody knows about citizenship. How does poverty complicate that? You've got, what, 30% of Egyptian households headed by women?
You see, 40% of the Egyptian is it for me?
Yes, please. Please,
40% of the Egyptian people are under poverty line,
40.
which means less than $2 per day for the individual. And among these 40%, women are the majority. For example, there are 31% of Egyptian families are led by women, either divorced or her husband died or just immigrated and she doesn't know where he is, and she leads the family. So the matter of poverty is crucial. It will decide many things. That's why during the revolution and in Tahrir Square and in all the squares all over Egypt, the slogan was عيش. عيش, it means bread. Freedom, human dignity, and social justice. These are the four main slogans of the Egyptian revolution. It was the slogan was spread all over the country. Bread, freedom, human integrity, social justice. The Egyptian economy is not a weak economy. Analysts say that it would be within 5 years one of the emerging powerful economies in the area. And this is conditioned by stability, and we know that there is no stability up till now after the revolution. So that tourism comes back. Tourism generated 12 billion dollar a year. Mm-hmm. So if we succeed to stabilize the country, to insert a sort of social justice very quickly, I think we will pass this period of instability.
Are you personally hopeful, or
yes.
Yeah?
Yes. You see, the Egyptian people, although there are poverty and unemployment and instability, they think that they discovered how powerful they are. Mm-hmm. And all the people, even the most poor of them, say that we will never go back. Egypt will never go back.
Okay. And we had, thank you, we had talked about this a little bit. I think this has really affected other countries in the region, because we know there have been riots, of course, in Jordan in the past over things as basic as aish and also dignity. And things have been, there have been some moments during this Arab Spring where things looked uncertain in Jordan.
Yeah, sure. I think, well, as Rabia said, the reform processes started in Jordan, in Morocco, even years before. As you maybe remember, 1989, when the revolution, because of poverty, started in South Jordan, in Ma'an, there was a quick response by the state, by the government, and by the leadership of the Hashemite family. His Majesty King Hussein, the late King Hussein, was really strategic in seeing the results, and automatically there was political reforms, and there was a national charter committee, and there was the reactivate the election processes, and all of these things, and the martial law was abolished. So many steps were taken, and there was a political will also to integrate and to give more representation to women and allow more participation to women. Now Jordan is part of the region, and there was some demonstrations, but it was not as large as it was in Egypt. But also again, the king and also the government were the king mostly, because the government has to be changed. Mm-hmm. The former one was not really responding enough. And there was the establishment of the National Dialogue Committee with all stakeholders part of, except the Muslim Brothers or the Muslim Front, who refused to be part as a party, but all other political parties and stakeholders, because there are the tribal system which affect the political system a lot. And also there was this election law and the promise to have a new elections very soon, beginning of the coming year. The municipal council's elections will happen before the end of this year, according to a new law that was passed also. There is the constitutional amendments, and as exactly happened in Egypt, the Royal Commission for the Constitutional Amendments were only 10 men. And the women movement and the Jordanian National Commission
in Egypt,
for Women,
11 men also.
But we did gathered and discuss it, and we have our full proposal for the constitutional amendments, and we present these amendments to the Royal Commission with a letter expressing our disappointment because no woman was there. But they received it, and many of the amendments were taken, except one very important for women, which is a clause that we insist it has to be there. The discussion is still ongoing related to equality, to clear phase or words of equality, because some of them are saying that Jordanians mean men and women. But we said, well, yes, but we needed to be more clear that Jordanians, despite of their sex, or are equal. So the discussion is still there, and I think, as you said, the economy will affect the situation, and this is another element which will push, I think, for a further political reform, because balancing the situation, because the economic crisis is really very serious in Jordan, the political amendments will a little bit help. And in the meantime, I think efforts should be done on this front, on the economic crisis front, because there is a real problem here. And as you said, women will be the most who will suffer from this. They are the, for example, the unemployment rate in Jordan. It is all in all 24%.
For everybody?
For everybody. But for women, it is 2.5 times double than men. So women are suffering from lack of jobs. And also there are in the private sector specifically, there is a pay gap between men and women for the same value of work, around 33%, which is too much.
For the same job?
For the same job. So we are working on all these issues, but our voice, I think, became more empowered by what's going on in the region, and the official authorities are more willing to listen to this. We were received by the head of the parliament and the prime minister and the king on the 8th of March. We women organizations had the lunch with the king, and the women, they express all what they see, not only for women issues and equality and their rights, but also they talk about corruption, they talk about the freedom of media, they talk about job opportunities, they talk all about independence of judiciary, because we had some very powerful women judges and prosecutors within the group. So I think women now are realizing under these circumstances more and more their role and their power, and the need for them to be more organized politically to gain more rights.
Well, sometimes I think the challenges, you've worked on them for so long, can seem so overwhelming that this kind of collective brain trust, which you see here before you, is the sort of thing that can give hope when there are the inevitable setbacks. But that doesn't mean that anybody here is about to give up. I mean, far from it. I think it's time, speaking of voices, to hear yours. I'm sure you have many questions, and I believe the convention we're going to use this morning is that I'm going to be given some questions, but I'll take them in any form that you wish to lob them, as long as they are civil and succinct to rules of this kind of forum. So, do we have a microphone? And that's for you in the audience. Okay, great. So who would like to, Mahnaz June, would you like to say something? Would you? Yes, please.
My question is basically to all of you, but specifically to Farida. You were talking about certain forces in Egypt who are the Sufis, distinguished from the Iranian Sufis, that would in a way be more likely to oppose a radical Islamist overpowering of the system than even non-religious people. Could you explain about that a little bit? Thank you.
Can everyone hear, by the way? Good, because that's important.
Yes, Mahnaz. In Egypt, there are three groups of Islamists. The Muslim Brothers, it is a historical movement from the beginning of last century, and the Salafists, who are connected to the oil countries, and it is a new movement, not very new, but about 40 years ago, and the Sufis. The Muslim Brothers, they say we are 3 million, and the Salafists say that we are 1 million, but the Sufis are surely 10 million. 10 millions, and they are completely against the Muslim Brothers and their political approach. Now the democratic movement is trying to convince the Sufis who are against in a very pragmatic way, because they are against the Muslim Brothers who represent the most dangerous movement within the Islam, political Islam, because they are very well organized and very rich also, and they are against women and the Christians. In their program, they said no woman, no Christian should take the post of a president or a cabinet or prime minister. And others say that even a minister should not be given, the post of a minister should not be given to a woman or a Christian. The Sophists, of course, were not politicized at all along their history. Even in the Islamic heritage, they were not historically politicized. But now they say we will go to elections to vote against the Muslim Brothers. And they are 10 million. If they go to vote 5 million of them, this will make make a difference, a real difference. But the matter is now that the Muslim Brothers and the Salafists, who are Wahhabi is a sect in the Saudi Arabia, is very conservative, and it reads the Quran literally, and it's also against women, against freedom of speech, against liberties as a whole, general liberties as a whole, and human rights. They say that human rights is a Western mode, so we are against these human rights. We are for Muslim rights, and these Muslim rights for them is very restrictive to women and all the minorities, especially the religious minorities. Muslim Brothers now are trying to cooperate with the Sufis on the ground that this is Islam, and we have to defend Islam we go together against those secular people who are, they also interpret secularism as atheism. Although we write to the intellectuals say, and we go to the TV and say and discuss with them about secularism, but they insist that secularism is atheism, and this is the conflict now.
And also, just in those numbers, you mentioned 10 million Sufis and 10 million Christians, I think, too.
And 10 million Christians, yes.
Population, just a sort of
yes.
point that some of you might have misremembered. All right, next question, please. Yes, ma'am, can you get the microphone there? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm June Zeitlin. I'm with the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, an organization based here in D.C.
Thank you for introducing yourself.
One of the things we're trying to do is get the United States to ratify CEDAW so we can join the rest of the world in supporting women's rights. And I know that the Women's Learning Partnership and many of you have been involved in a campaign in the region to remove reservations to CEDAW by your governments. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, and also how you've used CEDAW to advance women's rights in your own country and what difference it might make if the U.S. ratified it.
And for those who may not know, CETA. Please.
Use an acronym. CEDAW is the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. It's the most comprehensive women's human rights treaty. It's been ratified by 186 countries, and the U.S. stands in the company of Iran, Sudan, Somalia, and now I believe only 2 Pacific Islands, because one ratified it recently. So we're not in great company.
Okay. Rabia, I think, could you please answer?
Oui, dans la région, il y a un mouvement, il y a une coalition, un réseau régional qui comprend presque tous les pays arabes de la région, donc qui travaille sur la question de, contrairement aux États-Unis, la majorité des pays arabes ont ratifié la CEDAW, donc qui travaille sur la levée des réserves.
Okay. So contrary to the United States, most Arab countries have actually signed and ratified CEDAW. I will add with some reservations. In the MENA region, there's a coalition which has been set up in 2006, and it's called the Equality Without Reservation Coalition, which works within and with the Women Learning Partnership on 2 very specific demands, I would say. Lifting reservations, because with the reservation in place, you cannot implement CEDAW, and signing the CEDAW optional protocol, what is called OP-CEDAW.
Et récemment, le Maroc a levé les réserves et ratifié l'OP-CEDAW. La Tunisie, le nouveau gouvernement tunisien. Donc il y a des choses qui avancent. Le nouveau gouvernement tunisien aussi a annoncé la levée des réserves.
Recently, so the recent developments have been, Morocco has officially lifted its reservation on CEDAW and actually signed the optional protocol, and the new government in Tunisia has done the same.
Dernier point, c'est toute la bataille qui a été menée par exemple au Maroc, en Tunisie, je suppose dans d'autres pays, en Jordanie, c'est de mettre dans les constitutions, de préciser la place des conventions, des traités des droits de l'homme d'une façon générale, dans l'ordre juridique interne. Et c'est une grande bataille, parce que ça nous permet de contourner le débat sur la sécularisation.
Okay. So currently, and this is back perhaps to what you asked about strategy, the work currently is to integrate these conventions within the reform of the constitutions, the current constitutional reforms, so that the spirit of a convention such as CEDAW is actually integrated in the new convention, which would allow certain countries who are a bit sensitive to the issue of secularism, which would allow to overcome the debate on whether or not it should be a secular state.
De la place des conventions internationales dans l'ordre juridique interne.
Exactly. So the battle is actually to position international conventions such as CEDAW and other within the constitutional reform and within the legal framework of these countries.
I'm going to, in the interest of time, combine a couple of these questions because this just dovetails with what we're talking about right now. One question is, to what degree is there potential value in organizations collaborating across the region, which is exactly, of course, what you are already doing and why you are here. But then another question that I thought that went along with this, traditionally women's organizations, just combining a question here, have addressed authoritarian regimes, have monarchs, because that was who was in power, first ladies. Obviously, Jordan's had a long tradition there. As authoritarian rulership, it has been, in some cases, overthrown, decentralized in others, moving towards constitutions. To what degree can women's movements reach out to the public, particularly at the local level? You know, perhaps at the city council level, provincial level. Who would you want to take? Yes, thank you, Asma.
Well, I think you are absolutely right. And the women movement need to be very careful when they are building their coalitions. And it's very important to go down to the grassroots and to make sure that they are reflecting the real needs of those people, those women in different areas, and then reflect them on the upper levels. Of course, it's politics. Maybe one of the main development in the women movement in the region. It started as charitable work, organizing themselves to serve the society, and then it becomes more year after year civil society organization. Now there is this feeling that we need to be a political power and we need to organize ourselves politically and of course on the grassroots level, which means the municipal councils in every village and every town. And I am really happy because in Jordan, women in this level are 30%, and then they will grow to be up. Of course, the leadership in Jordan and Her Majesty the Queen, the chair of the Jordanian National Commission for Women, she is Princess Basma. She is part of the royal family. Of course, they are supporting. But if the issues are not related to the grassroots, then there will be a problem. If the issues are reflecting what are the needs on the grassroots level, that will be helpful. And women will feel that maybe the women movement is playing their role in approaching the politicians in the country, the government, the king, the parliament, all these in the top of the politics. It's very sensitive and dangerous if the women were acting in isolation of the population. And it's important also to be part of the struggle for public freedoms, human rights, development, all these aspects with others in civil society, but in the meantime ask others to support the causes of women movement. We start to realize it newly, the last decade maybe. And I may here mention our partnership, the WLP partnership. The very unique thing in this partnership is we are here in DC discussing issues, but we bring all the experiences, the demands, the suffering, the successes from the grassroots organizations that we are working with, our members who are everywhere, up here, and we exchange these experiences with our partners in other countries. So, and then when we go back, we try to meet the needs of those women in a collective way in our partnership. So this is very important. But I do not think that any progress can happen also without being part of the political activism.
I also think that one of our questions that's come in has come in from Twitter and is asking about whether there should be quotas in Parliament. But it has made me think about social networking as a change agent. Some of the members of WLP didn't necessarily want to take the stage because now we, of course, can talk to each other not only directly but via Skype and other social media. And I'm just wondering, I would like to ask this to Rabia, would quotas help And could you talk a little bit about, in Morocco, are you able to talk to grassroots organizations, for example, in Yemen, or is that absolutely impossible? Let's take the quotas question first. Quotas in parliament in Morocco or any of the other countries we're discussing, would this help? This is a question that's come into us live stream Twitter.
Pour la question des quotas, franchement, j'ai un avis tout à fait personnel. Je pense que les quotas dans des régimes non démocratiques constituent un réel problème. Ça, c'est un avis personnel.
So starting with her personal opinion, she thinks that quota, and of course we're talking about quotas for women within dictatorships are actually problematic.
Parce qu'il y a beaucoup de cooptation, d'instrumentalisation des femmes, donc qui ne... Vous allez me dire que les femmes ont le droit de participer de toute façon, autant que les hommes. Mais c'est quand même problématique.
Of course, one would say that women have the right to participate, and of course they do. However, quotas within dictatorships, within totalitarian regimes, have actually resulted inevitably in co-opting and instrumentalizing women.
Donc en fait, c'est tout le problème des élites politiques et sociales dans nos pays, parce que dans le monde arabe, les États sont très forts, les sociétés très faibles.
And this is of course related to the issue of political and social elites. Until now, in many countries, states are very strong, and civil society, or society in general, not civil society, of course, are not that strong, on the contrary.
C'est pour ça que je pense que nous avons besoin de rediscuter nos stratégies de travail. Je crois que l'un des impacts peut-être positifs du printemps arabe, c'est qu'il va y avoir des marges de liberté, je ne dis pas la liberté, mais des marges de liberté d'expression qui vont peut-être permettre à la société de se renforcer.
So what we need now is really rethink critically our strategies so far, and perhaps one of the impact of what we're calling the Arab Spring would be to open up margins of freedom, and she insists not freedom necessarily, but margins of freedom for expression, which we could use to actually start thinking critically about our old strategies.
Can I ask the quota question also of Egypt? Do you think that quotas is that even a possibility? Is that in the discussion? Would it help?
The quota system?
In parliament, if there were a certain number of seats.
You see, we in Egypt suffered very much from the idea that the quota was that of Mrs. Mubarak. The quota system was introduced during the regime of Mubarak. 2 years ago. The last elections was in 2010. It was introduced 2009. Although the feminist movement during more than half a century asked for the quota, for a quota system that is just and representing and makes it easy for women to be to get the seats in the parliament. The quota system, when introduced, didn't put in the mind of Mrs. Mubarak or those who arranged it, because actually she defended the quota system because she has a program to inherit Gamal Mubarak the seat of his father. This is one of the major issues in the conflict in Egypt that produced the revolution of January. That there was despotism was very, very widespread, poverty and corruption. After the fall of Mubarak, we discovered that corruption was larger and much more spread than we ever imagined. So all the tools were collected to inherit the seat of the head of the republic to Gamal Mubarak. And the quota was اتفسرت
Explained.
was designed to enable the boy to get the seat. And how happened that the constituencies in Egypt are almost small. When they arranged the quota, the constituency for the seat of a woman is one governorate. One governorate. That means millions of votes that women has to speak to and have to collect to get the seat. There were 64 women who got the seats really, but all of them were the women of Mrs. Mubarak. And that's why one of my friends said she succeeded to make the people hate the cause of women.
Okay.
Because of this distortion of the quota. But the democratic parties in Egypt introduced another system which is rational and practical for a quota system to guarantee 30% of the seats for women in the parliament.
We have actually just about 5 more minutes left. Rabia would like to say something else, though, about the... thank you for that really amazing illustration of
Je voulais dire que
how it can be used
généralement,
negatively.
oui, que les gouvernements et les élites politiques ont discrédité le quota d'une façon générale et surtout en commençant par le haut. C'est-à-dire que nous avons des situations bizarres dans les pays arabes où il y a plus de femmes, de proportion de femmes dans les parlements que dans les niveaux locaux.
Okay. So just shortly and succinctly, totalitarian regimes and their political elite have actually, in brief, discredited the quota system and starting from the top, which is a weird situation, whereas you have more women in parliaments, much more than women in...
We'll just let...
I'm sorry.
It's all right.
I'm sorry.
It happened to all of us. Everybody's nightmare, right? There you go. Okay.
That was the point. So
Why don't you
starting from the top, more women, and then you get to the grassroots, to the community level, less women. So it's the discreditation of the quota system.
Et deuxième point, c'est qu'il y a une tendance générale dans tous les pays arabes, c'est les mouvements islamistes, l'islam politique, je veux dire, ont plus tendance à encourager les quotas que les partis, par exemple, démocratiques, les partis politiques démocratiques ou de gauche, d'une façon générale.
And the second and last point is that in the MENA region, Islamist and Islamist parties have actually the tendency to support and push for quotas.
Plus que les partis démocratiques.
Way more than leftist or democratic parties. Islamist parties are actually for the quota system.
Thank you. So let's take one more audience question because all my written ones are pretty lengthy. A pointed, quick one. Yes, you right in the center, please, man in blue.
Amen.
Sorry?
2 men who are asking.
Well, you know what? Let's do. This might be more fair. We'll take 2 or 3 questions together, okay?
Yeah.
So,
Good morning. My name is Meher Qayyum. I'm from the Wharton Net Knowledge Project.
Thank you.
My question actually is to each of the panelists. Ms. Khader, you mentioned that there is a mismatch between women's education being so high, yet the unemployment rate is below 20-ish%. I'm wondering to what extent this is a similar situation across the MENA region. And secondly, if I may, to what extent then does that influence women who are in the informal sector to try to push to formalize their sector or formalize as entrepreneurs, or does that hold them back, this continued informal economy?
Okay, so if I could summarize that, I'm going to just say impact of education, if you don't mind, and then someone else, there was a gentleman back there who's got his hand in the...
Eric Rothberg, in terms of the issue of, you talked about building coalitions, what about in terms of building coalitions with Muslim women or more religious societal grassroots? You seem to paint as kind of them against us. What are you doing in the way of building broader coalitions with women, Muslim women in society, more conservative, that sort of thing?
Thank you. And the last third one. Yes, sir.
Okay, my question also relates to coalitions. My name is Garrett Nada. I'm a graduate student in Middle East Studies at George Washington University. So for each panelist, I'm sort of wondering, to what extent do these women's groups cross ethnic and or religious lines? So in Morocco, between Amazigh and Arabs, and even in Jordan, between Palestinians or East Bankers, West Bankers, however you want to phrase it, and in Egypt, obviously, between Copts and Muslims. Because you were speaking about how the groups on the grassroots level, but sort of when you get more at the city or the national, do these groups cross those lines? Thank you.
So maybe each of you could just think about those questions as you sort of briefly wrap up.
Well, I think it's absolutely right. The question about the way the women in the informal sector can be organized themselves to be recognized formally, and one effort that we as women movement claim for it years now, we got it just last year, that women individually can be part of this social security system in the country. So they start to be part of the national social security system. And this will encourage them to be registered officially and to be recognized officially. I agree that there is some obstacles need to be tackled. Some is the supporting services for mothers, for example, working mothers. There are some labor law need to be strengthening in a way that support maternity issues, which we are working on, and we were able to get some new amendments lately on the labor law. So there are work in progress to meet these needs and to bridge the gap. It is not necessarily in all the Arab regions the same. In Morocco, I think, Lebanon, Tunisia, the percentage of women in the labor market are higher than Jordan, while the educational rate in Jordan is higher. So there are different elements. And for me, I see there is a link between the private-public rights and the distribution of traditional roles between men and women. Now working women have to do everything at home as traditionally she was asked to do beside her job. So it needs some cultural also, and work on the mentality and the type of relation between male and female within the family. As per the coalitions, in fact, as JNCW in Jordan, which is the Jordanian National Commission for Women, we tried to establish a committee on women and political parties. And we invited all political parties. Within them is 3 Islamic political parties, different political parties. And to be frank, the discussion in the beginning was very hard, because every one of them want to represent the views, the political views of their party. But when it comes to women issues discussion, you can easily see they start to criticize their own political parties, because, for example, they are not giving them space to reach the leading positions, or because they are not organizing meetings in the daytime. Usually they have their meetings late in the evenings, which is not suitable to the members of the political party. And they start to realize their own needs as women, even with this political framework. So I agree that when we work, at least in Jordan, we are open to all women in Jordan, despite of their religious, or there are from tribes or from Palestinian origin or Cherkessian origin or whatever. It is in the heart of the, in my opinion, women politics, which I hope will present a different model.
And Rabia, just we're going to have to say goodbye, but just quickly, would you add something about outreach?
Oui, juste par rapport à la diversité, je vous propose de regarder la photo des membres de la coalition WEP, la Commission mondiale. Et vous allez constater la grande diversité, disons, de ce mouvement. Et donc, c'est un petit peu comme ça, même au niveau régional, national.
On the issue of diversity, I would suggest, just for illustration, that you look at the different members, for instance, of the Women Linking Partnership, at least those who are here, which is actually a case in point in diversity, all forms of diversity, whether nationalities, ethnicities, etc.
Quant au dialogue, enfin la coalition avec les femmes musulmanes, nous sommes des femmes musulmanes. Est-ce que, si vous voulez dire avec les femmes islamistes, oui, mais pourquoi faire? On fait des coalitions pour faire des choses ensemble.
So, with regards to the question of reaching out or dialogue or coalition with Muslim women, if it is meant by Muslim women, Muslim as an identity, we are, all of us or most of us, Muslim. If you are talking about Islamist women, then we ask the question, Islamist as in political Islam. The question is, a coalition for what purpose? When we are in coalitions such as within the partnership, we have a shared vision and a shared goal, and we want to do something together.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And finally, Farida. how many members is Women Learning? Yes, I always give her the easy ones. I like to give you the easy ones. How many members is Women Learning Partnership up to now? Women's Learning Partnership. We are now, how many members?
Mike? Mike, guys.
We'll wait.
Okay, we have 20 countries, and maybe you guys want to get up and show your diversity.
Show your diversity.
Yes, we're everybody here.
Oh.
All right. Thank you.
Hey.
And they're from Central Asia, Africa, Middle East, and of course Latin America. But these 20 organizations have their large constituencies, and also they also work with other countries. For instance, Morocco works with Algeria and Tunisia, and Lebanon works with Syria and Iraq, and Nigeria works with a number of African countries, both Lusophone and Francophone. So all in all, they grow to be into 40 countries, and actually I think tens and thousands of women. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that actually, Farida, would you like to say one last thing? Because I think we should conclude.
Yes. About coalitions, we are used in the feminist movement in Egypt and the democratic movement, the parties and syndicates to have coalitions, because as we know, despotism restricted the democratic life of the country by many laws. These laws are still there, and we are fighting to lift them. Even the emergency law, which is continued for 30 years up till now, and it is still working. So the fundamentalist movement was growing very, very on a very large scale in the mosques. We are not allowed to go to work in the mosques, of course, and we are not allowed to work even in our parties and associations, but for very limited space. That's why I think the growth of the fundamentalist movement is not because the people مرتبطين بيهم, are connected to them, but because the despotism, and I think this was what happened in Iran. Despotism enabled the fundamentalist movement to grow within the mosques and small places, religious places. That one of the bases of our coalitions was how to be powerful despite of despotism and restriction.
Well, I think that this conference and Women's Learning Partnership and the Wilson Center under Haleh Esfandiari's vision is absolutely part of broadening the rights of women and justice and respect and dignity for women and thereby society. It has been such an honor to be with you, Farida Naqash and Asma Khader and Rabia Nasiri. Thank you, and thank you so much, Lina Abu Habib, for joining us, and all of you for coming. Thank you very much.